Have you ever heard of a war that was over before you could even finish your lunch break? No, I'm not kidding. Today, we're rediving into the incredible story of the shortest war in recorded history, the Anglo-Zanzibar War of 1896. A conflict so short, it lasted somewhere between 38 and 45 minutes, depending on who you ask. How on earth did a war start and end so quickly? Stick around, because the story is as fascinating as it is bizarre. To understand this Blink-Injil-Masit War, we need to head back to the late 19th century. The scene is Zanzibar, a beautiful island sultanate off the coast of modern-day Tanzania. At the time, it was a major hub for the spice and slave trades. And like much of Africa, it was caught in the great game of European colonial ambitions. The British Empire, with its powerful Royal Navy, had a huge influence over the region. They had signed a treaty with Zanzibar, essentially making it a British protectorate. The deal was simple. Zanzibar could have its own sultan, as long as that sultan was approved by the British for a while. This arrangement worked. The pro-British Sultan Hamad bin Thawani ruled, and things were relatively stable. But on August 25, 1896, Sultan Hamad died suddenly. Now, some historians whisper that he might have been poisoned, and the prime suspect was his own cousin, Khalid bin Bargash. Why? Because almost immediately after Hamad's death, Khalid seized the palace, declared himself the new sultan, and barricaded himself inside with about 2,800 loyal followers. This was a direct challenge to British authority. They had their own preferred candidate, another cousin named Hamad bin Mohammed, who was much more likely to cooperate with British interests, particularly their goal of abolishing slavery in the region. The British consul in Zanzibar, Basil Cave, was not amused. He sent an immediate message to Khalid, telling him to stand down. Khalid, however, felt he had a legitimate claim to the throne and refused to budge. He probably thought the British were bluffing. Big mistake. The British Empire did not bluff when it came to its colonial authority. In response, the Royal Navy began to assemble a fleet in the harbor right in front of the Sultan's palace. They brought in the big guns, 2 cruisers, the HMS Philomel and the HMS Raccoon, and 3 gunboats, the HMS Thrush, HMS Sparrow, and the largest of them all, the HMS St. George. They had the palace completely surrounded. The British issued a clear ultimatum to Khalid: lower your flag and leave the palace by 9 a.m. on August 27th, or we will open fire. Can you imagine the tension? Inside the palace, Khalid and his men were armed, but their weaponry was a mix of old cannons, a few Maxim machine guns, and mostly just rifles. They even had a small navy of their own, a single-armed yacht, the HHS Glasgow, which was a gift from Queen Victoria to a previous sultan. It was no match for the might of the Royal Navy parked just a few hundred yards away. As the clock ticked towards 9 a.m., the atmosphere in Zanzibar's harbor must have been electric. The British sailors were at their stations, their guns aimed directly at the wooden palace. On the shore, Khalid's forces nervously watched the steel warships. Perhaps still hoping the British wouldn't actually shoot, Khalid sent last-minute messages trying to negotiate. But the British diplomat's reply was firm: "We have no desire to open fire. But unless you do as you are told, we shall certainly do so." The deadline was absolute. At exactly 9 a.m., the deadline passed. Khalid's flag was still flying defiantly above the palace. 2 minutes later, at 9:02 a.m., the British Admiral, Harry Rawson, gave the order. The naval bombardment began. The sheer destructive power unleashed was overwhelming. The first shells from the HMS Raccoon slammed into the palace, instantly reducing its wooden structure to splinters and dust. The other ships joined in, systematically tearing the palace apart. The defenders' old bronze cannons were no match for modern naval artillery. They tried to fire back, but their shots were wildly inaccurate and did little to no damage to the armored British ships. Meanwhile, the Sultan's yacht, the HHS Glasgow, made a valiant but futile attempt to engage the powerful HMS St. George. It was like a rowboat trying to fight a battleship. The St. George returned fire, and within minutes, the Glasgow was a sinking wreck, its mast broken and its crew forced to abandon ship. On land, chaos reigned. The palace was on fire, its defenses crumbling under the relentless shelling. Khalid's men were in disarray, facing a force they simply could not compete with. Inside the burning palace, it became clear that this was not a battle. It was a demolition. Realizing the situation was hopeless, Sultan Khalid fled. He escaped through a back exit and sought refuge in the German consulate nearby. International law at the time meant the British couldn't just storm the German consulate to arrest him. So, while his followers were left to face the bombardment, the man who started it all slipped away to safety. With the Sultan gone and the palace in ruins, the resistance collapsed completely. The Sultan's flag, the symbol of his defiance, was shot down. By around 9:40 a.m., the firing stopped. The battle was over. The Anglo-Zanzibar War had officially ended. The aftermath was grimly one-sided. On the Zanzibari side, an estimated 500 of Khalid's men were killed or wounded. The palace was a smoldering ruin, and the Sultan's yacht was at the bottom of the harbor. And on the British side, just one sailor was slightly injured. It was one of the most lopsided conflicts in military history. With Khalid gone, the British quickly installed their chosen candidate, Hamoud bin Mohammed, as the new sultan. He ruled for several years and, importantly for the British, cooperated with their anti-slavery policies. As for Khalid, he was eventually smuggled out of Zanzibar by the Germans and lived in exile. The war, as short as it was, had a lasting impact. It was a brutal and clear demonstration of British imperial power. It sent a message to any other potential challengers in the region. Don't mess with the empire? The war cemented British control over Zanzibar, which remained a protectorate until it gained independence in 1963. So there you have it. A war that lasted less than an hour, but is packed with lessons about power, colonialism, and what happens when an ultimatum is ignored. It's a strange but true story that proves history can be more dramatic and unbelievable than any work of fiction. A 38-minute war that changed the course of a nation. Thanks so much for watching. What do you think is the most unbelievable part of this story? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this dive into a forgotten piece of history, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more fascinating stories from the past. We'll see you in the next video.